Welcome, everybody. It's my pleasure to be opening the second day of the World Congress on Justice for Children. In just a moment, we'll be starting our session on children's rights and climate justice. But before we do, I'd like to hand over to our organizers for a brief logistical announcement.
Thank you, Leo. So good morning. Just a brief announcement regarding the logistic. We realize that many people are not yet registered to the parallel session. So it's important to do it. But if it's not the case yet, and if some people doesn't have access to the application for a reason or another, when you leave this plenary session, you can go wherever you want. All the parallel sessions are well written in this booklet, and you will see some volunteers outside with a map. So it will be easy to find your room. So if you are not yet registered, it's not a big deal. You just choose a parallel session here, and you go by yourself. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And while we're talking about logistics, for anybody who needs the translation, we have Spanish and English on channel 1, Spanish and French on channel 2, and Arabic and Spanish on channel 3. So as I say, it's my pleasure to be welcoming you to this opening session of day 2 of the World Congress, whether you're joining us online or with us here in Madrid. We'll be having a discussion today about climate justice and children's rights. And I think it's safe to say that nobody in this room will need convincing of the seriousness of the challenges we face in terms of climate justice and the devastating impact that that can have on children. With this session, we'll be focusing not just on the challenges that face us, but also how we can respond and what we can do together on what justice demands for children in the climate crisis. It's my pleasure to be moderating this panel with a truly wonderful range of experts who reflect a good slice of the expertise and the talents that we'll need to meet the scale of the challenge that we face. So to get our conversation going, I'd like to introduce our keynote speaker for today, Elisa Morguera, who's a professor of global environmental law, the UN Special Rapporteur on climate change and human rights, and a tireless advocate in the climate space.
Thank you so much. Buenos dias. I'm going to make my speech in English, but I'm happy to then have conversations in Spanish, maybe when we have questions. We'll start by setting the scene. I think all the panelists will have a lot to say about how children's rights are affected by climate change, but equally how children have already been champions in the fight for climate justice, and in fact in identifying many sites of important areas for protecting everyone's human right to a healthy environment in the context of climate change. It's been children and teenagers who have been calling for instance, protecting the ocean as part of a safe climate. But very often when I meet even climate experts, they may not be necessarily aware of how important the ocean is still in the regulation of our climate. So just to set the scene, this has been 30 years of international climate action and cooperation. And yet 2024 was the hottest year on recorded history, preceded by 9 years who also broke the record of being the hottest years in recorded history. The ocean has never been hotter. And this should be also of great concern to us because the ocean naturally has kept our atmosphere 36 degrees cooler than it would have been otherwise. We've seen unprecedented impacts of climate change, particularly in terms of extreme weather events. This has been the reality of small island developing states in the Pacific, in the Caribbean, also of states in Africa, Asia, and Latin America for 10 years. Last year in December, I visited Vanuatu, and I just couldn't believe the compounded human rights impacts of climate change in a country that for 10 years has learned to be afraid of rain, of wind, where children have seen their houses destroyed time and again, and where the loss of education has been so severe, together with families struggling for food, for safety, where schools are used as shelter. They were actually very unsafe for children, particularly for girls and children with disabilities, and where the state has simply well beyond the reach of their abilities to be adapting to climate change, let alone responding to the loss of damage that has been experienced. But I think here in Europe, in the global north, in the last 2 years, we've also seen already catastrophic climate events. And I think we should all be aware that no one is safe. Our own bodies are changing because of climate change. And I will share a few facts from the health science that I think should be really important for everyone working on children's rights to engage with and consider advancing that work. While we are in this situation, despite 30 years of climate action, is a really important question for all of us to ask if we are interested in protecting children's rights today and in the immediate future. Last year, there were at least 2 independent UN assessments of states' commitments to mitigate climate change, as well as their commitments to advance action by 2030. And it was very clear that that whole of state commitments is falling incredibly short of what we need to prevent a systemic crossing of a global temperature increase of 1.5 degrees, which has been politically identified as the limit that we need to work towards to prevent almost irreparable climate impacts. And let's just be clear, from a scientific perspective, that 1.5 degree, it's not a safe limit for humanity, but it is what we could politically agree on. But in fact, we know, or at least some of the industries who are behind climate change know from 60 years what their activities were going to lead the whole planet and humanity towards. And we really need to be aware of that role of the private sector, the role also of states who are still not taking the action that we know is necessary to mitigate climate change and bring us on a path towards a safer climate. The climate change has been time and again recognized as a human rights crisis, and I think it is very fair, even only on the basis of the work that UNICEF has done, but many others are also tracking those impacts. It is a children's human rights crisis. It has become also an education crisis. Last year, 1 in 7 children experienced severe disruption of their education. But in fact, all the range of children's rights to life, survival, development, their health, including their mental health, their right to play, their rights, all their political and civil rights are affected by climate change. And again, I want to just bring to your attention a few facts from the health sciences to really understand in what intimate, deep ways our own well-being is affected by climate change. We may not have experienced an extreme climate events, and we are very fortunate. This is not the experience of many other persons on this planet, but things are changing around us, also in slow ways that do affect right now our health and well-being. And of course, for children who are in a development path and have very significant windows of vulnerability as they grow, that is even more significant. So for instance, our levels of salinity in our bodies are changing because of sea level rise. That means that seawater is intruding in freshwater resources that then make our drinking water, and that affects the salinities in the bodies of expecting mothers and children, increasing the risk of negative outcomes for birth. Air pollution is also increasing, and it has already affected every single organ of our body. Some regions in the world are experiencing this more than others, but air pollution is a global health crisis that is very much linked to climate change, to the sources of climate change, as well as being worsened by climate change. And another important example is plastics. You know all, I think, about the global plastics pollution crisis. But not many people know that plastics is very much linked to the production of fossil fuels, who are the main cause of climate change. And plastics as well is present in our bodies. Every single one of us has plastics in their brains, in their organs, and this is, again, projected to grow unless we really rethink the production of plastics, the use of plastic that we see single use in our food systems, in our health systems, but also in many significant parts of our production systems, including the system to support our transition to renewable energy. And finally, climate change affects biodiversity, nature. Nature is where how our health protects itself, how we heal, how we rebound from, for instance, surgical operation in half of the time if we are in a hospital next to a biodiverse forest, as opposed to being in a hospital far from any natural area. And we know that a contact with nature has really supported us mentally and physically during the pandemic. We've all had that experience, and it's really crucial to understand how every impact on terrestrial or marine biodiversity of climate change affects our human well-being, from the connections between our microbiome and the microbes in the environment to planetary cycles related to the global water cycle or the global carbon cycle. So this is a bit of a bleak picture, but I think it is important for all those who are not in touch with environmental debates or climate debates to realize that every children human rights expert and advocate needs to be with children in asking for climate justice. And human rights, and I think particularly children's human rights, have not been relied enough, I think, in that the various calls and various international processes in which we are seeking climate justice for children and for everyone. In particular, we've heard yesterday about the importance of children's right to be heard, and I think this should always be also understood in terms of children's rights to freedom of expression and choosing the means to express their views, whether that may be art, that may be non-written, and how our spaces for discussions on climate change, on plastics, on air pollution, are not really spaces where children can express themselves in their preferred means. And interestingly enough, what I've been looking into theories of transformation and transformation methodologies, and we have neuroscience evidence indicating how adults themselves are more able to think in transformative ways if they play, if they engage with art. So I think there's a really important opportunity there to engage more with children-led and children-centered methodologies based on art and play for everyone, but including for adults to be better able to think in more imaginative, empathic ways about the transformation, the system-wide transformation, as Anne Skelton was saying yesterday, we need for humanity to move seriously towards a path towards a safer climate and a safer environment for all of us. It is really important to think about children's right to development as part of the broader discussions that all the states are having among themselves and before international tribunals about how we need to understand development and our development pathways towards a safer climate. You may be aware that there were 3 international tribunals that in the last couple of years have been asked to clarify state obligations on climate change. And this is because, unfortunately, our main UN process on climate change has not progressed enough in clarifying what these obligations are, and has not progressed enough in ensuring implementation of those obligations. One tribunal was the International Tribunal for the Law of the Sea. So going back to the point I made earlier about how important the ocean is for our human well-being and for climate action. But at the moment, there are 2 other tribunals who are reflecting on this question, and they're about to release their advisory opinions. One is the International Court of Justice, and the other is the Inter-American Court on Human Rights. And the reason children and young people were present in those processes, they were very forceful and powerful in their arguments about how each court should really understand state obligations and states and people's human right to development in the light of the obligations to protect children's rights in the context of climate change. And to me, the argument I've been developing in my own work as UN Special Rapporteur is really understanding development as a process and a human right to development as an obligation to develop, development models, economic models that contribute to human health and planetary health. And the 2 are interconnected. We understand that more than we ever did before. And that means imagining and understanding development in the light of the human right to a healthy environment, including the specificities of children's rights to a healthy environment. Now, the healthy environment is, as a human right, has been formally recognized relatively recently through a Human Rights Council resolution and the UN General Assembly resolutions. But in fact, we had decades of interpretative practices clarifying how a healthy environment is a precondition for every single human right we have. And very recently, the Committee on the Rights of the Child co-developed, in fact, also with children, a general comment on children's rights to a healthy environment. And that includes clean air, safe climate, healthy biodiversity, healthy foods, a healthy ocean, and all these elements need to be present and considered in every decision we make towards any development pathways we're considering. In moving away from the current fossil fuel-based economic system that has brought us and is keeping us in a climate crisis, and moving towards a renewable-based economic model that is truly in harmony with nature. And all the climate measures we identify needs to be measures that also make sense from a biodiversity perspective, from an ocean health perspective, make sense from an air pollution perspective, and safe and nutritious food perspective. Those solutions may appear more difficult, but in fact are the natural ones, so to say. They don't necessarily need to be highly technological, but they really need to be based on a very nuanced understanding of how all the dimensions of our human well-being and every dimension of children's well-being and right to development are dependent on those, basically on a healthy web of life that has made our life and well-being possible on this planet until now. And this is where we really need to think about how we create a space that not only is safe for children, but in fact based on those children methodologies that are art-based and play-based, for children to help us to think more systemically and deeply and empathically about human health and well-being in the context of planetary health, how we can together imagine a life, social and economic models that can lead us to this path, back to a path of towards a safer climate, and where children's imaginations can help us understand what we need to change, accept maybe some aspects of our realities that need to change, but that are very clearly identified by the science as necessary for us to move towards a safer climate. And in that context, I think maybe my last point is how important children's rights to information, and in fact everyone's right to information, about what are the most effective measures we need to take now in this decade, according to the best science we have available, to move meaningfully towards a safe climate. And what are other solutions and opportunities that have been identified in the UN climate process and in other conversations on climate change and beyond, who are not as effective, who are untested, and that create risks if they in any way delay the action we need. And just maybe the very final point is that we are not limited to the UN climate process for discussing and seeking climate justice and meaningful action. I mentioned earlier the importance of plastics. There's an ongoing UN plastics treaty negotiation. And I'm not quite aware of how many children and young people have their voices there and how many children's rights experts are there. But that can be a treaty where we can have very meaningful obligations on, for instance, phasing out the production of plastic, which is not only a global planetary crisis in itself, but worsens the impacts of climate change and our capacities of resilience. There's also a UN convention negotiations on tax. And very recently I learned how tax justice is very much linked to climate justice. The private companies who are contributing to climate change are the ones who are benefiting not only from tax breaks, but also illicit financial activities that requires international cooperation, and the climate finance that we all need to really be able to confront climate change while it's still happening, it's very much hidden into that block of tax justice. So just to say then in concluding that there are many areas of international law that are related to climate justice and that very much need your expertise as climate children rights experts, and those areas also need all of our support to be able to be safe and open, and in fact building all children's methodologies for all of us to be guided by children human rights as I think the safest legal and scientific basis to really progress as quickly as we need towards a safer climate. Thank you.
Thank you so much for setting that out so clearly, not only where we are today, how children's rights are engaged in the climate context, and the role that children can also play in addressing the climate crisis, and also for helping us transition so naturally into our next speaker, who I'd like to introduce, Dr. Lara Lazaro-Tuza, Senior Research Fellow at the Elcano Institute and Professor of Economics. Dr. Lara, how can we address justice for children in the international context?
Thank you very much, Leo. I don't know whether I can... Oh. Cheers. Can you hear me properly? Thank you. So thank you very much, Leo, for the introduction and the question. So Elisa has very clearly set out that as a result of these intersecting threats, children's health inequalities, both globally and locally, can be enlarged. And in the international climate negotiations, we've seen that justice, that the idea of justice and that the concept of justice has been included since at least 1992 in the UNFCCC, in the United Nations Framework Convention of Climate Change. Negotiations have included justice, distributed justice, procedural justice, and also little by little recognition justice as well. We have Principle 3.4 of the UNFCCC, which is the principle of common but differentiated responsibilities and respective capabilities. However, justice has only become prevalent in academic and policy debates in recent years. If we think about recognition of justice, it means really including in our analyses the different stakeholders that have to be included, which obviously talks to and speaks to children and youth. So Article 3 of the UNFCCC notes that protecting the climate system for the benefit of present and future generations, so that talks to intergenerational justice, so this is included in the international climate negotiations. The UNFCCC also speaks about the right to sustainable development, and if you remember, if we go back to the 1987 Brundtland report, it talks about sustainability as meeting the needs of the present generation without impairing the needs of future generations. So that is enshrined into the UNFCCC. Article 3.3 of the Treaty of the European Union also talks about the legal obligation to promote solidarity between generations. And we have a new commissioner, Mr. Glenn Micallef, who's Commissioner for Intergenerational Fairness, Youth, Culture and Sport. But there's currently more work to do in terms of including climate in this. Apologies. I hope you can hear me better now. So what have we seen in COPs? In COPs we've seen that children and youth have been increasingly recognized. That there's been an establishment of different institutions. We have the Youngo group that is present at COPs. We have forums, we have initiatives. We've had 2 youth climate champions in UNFCCC negotiations. And not only that, but also different countries. Spain, for example, has an initiative called Generation Clima. And every year we have a call so that people that are young can be trained, can be part of the Spanish delegation. So this is an important initiative not only to increase knowledge of young people, but also include them in climate negotiations. Initiatives like climate change summer camps, we have the youth increasingly shaping the discourse in climate negotiations. We had a couple of years ago not only the global stocktake, but also the youth stocktake. So I think this is important. If we go back the last 10 years, so since the Paris Agreement, this is the 10th anniversary of the Paris Agreement in by the end of 2025. So we have seen a slow but steady increase in the representation of youth in climate negotiations. And not only do children go to climate negotiations and are included in national delegations, but they also speak increasingly at different pavilions. We had the luxury and the honor of supporting the Spanish government last year in organizing the Spanish pavilion. And there's also a day that's dedicated to youth in COP negotiations, and we had events by Generation Klima and by the Spanish Youth Climate Council. And in these events, what came out was really that children are not only affected by climate change, but they're also agents of change. In Europe, we saw this very clearly in the first Commission, von der Leyen Commission. One of the speeches that she gave as she became President of the European Commission, she said, "I have heard you in the streets," and this drove, or was one of the drivers, for one of the big initiatives within Europe, which was the European Green Deal. Now, we know that it's difficult times right now for climate action, but this, I think, this movement that started round about 2018 and that had an impact in Europe's European Green Deal has institutions and is continuing to yield fruit. If we go to how children are thinking about climate change, and this is work that we've analysed at Elcano Royal Institute and that we've done through surveys, I'm going to talk about global issues and global concerns about climate change and then go into our own analyses. So the UNCC Learn initiative, there was a survey in 2022, a global survey of 6,548 people around the world, 178 countries represented. It's an online survey, and it's basically people who had already taken a UN course, so that will be, the responses will be biased in this sense. But youth respondents said that they are affected by climate change. 91% of respondents feel that they're affected by climate change. 77% that climate change is increasing the frequency and intensity of extreme weather events. And this is corroborated by scientific facts. We know that children born in 2020 will see a 2 to 7-fold increase in the exposure to extreme weather events compared to people born in 1960. 45% of these respondents say that they have seen disruption in the availability of resources, and more than a third of young people are suffering eco-anxiety. However, in this idea of children and young people as agents of change, it's also important to think about what the ILO 2025 analysis of youth and just transition was stating, based on People's Climate Vote, that young people under 18 were more supportive of solutions towards climate change, including renewables and sustainable agriculture, compared to the global average. So affected, but also agents of change. They're also eager to learn about climate change, with 98% of respondents stating that they want to learn about climate change more in schools and universities. There are geographical disparities in the specific interests about learning on climate change. So, for example, African respondents focused more about climate negotiations, climate and youth, gender equality, living with climate change, and taking climate action. Asia was more focused on learning about sustainable diet, climate change and youth. And in Latin America, key concerns regarding learning and climate change was how climate change is affecting the country and the world, the interconnection between the rights, human rights, climate change and climate change negotiations. And 72% of these young people stated that they were already taking action in their own localities and schools. So going now towards a specific local example or national example of Spain, what do people aged 18 to 29 in Spain think about climate change? What we see is that there's a slight difference in terms of the perceived threat. The general population in Spain says wars are basically the largest threat humanity is facing. Children, or young adults in this case, state that climate change is the biggest threat humanity is facing. We have less climate deniers versus the global population. They're more aware of the anthropogenic nature of climate change. They have lower self-awareness of their own doing in terms of climate change. They have larger support than the global average, than the national average in allocating national state budget towards climate action. They are more willing than the adult population to pay, to internalize the externalities caused by climate change, and they're willing to pay more, even though they are less wealthy than their counterparts. And it's also interesting to note that there's similar support from young adults compared to the national population in terms of support for climate policies. So they support, as I said, and this coincides with the global surveys, they support renewable deployment. They want scientific guiding of political decisions. They also support just transition, and in just transition, the ILO is adamant in stating that we need public-private partnerships in order to make these young people who are agents of change not only heavily impacted by climate change, but also agents of change. We need to include them, we need to increase their skills, we need to partner with the private sector, with educational institutions, in order to provide for a better future. And I'll leave it at that. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for that wonderful intervention, really setting out where we are currently internationally in terms of how children are being engaged through the international processes, but also what they want to see in the future. I think that's a wonderful way to leave us. I'd like to now introduce our third speaker, who will be moving the conversation on to look at how businesses need to be involved in responding to the climate crisis. Gonzalo Sáenz de Miera is Director of Climate Change and Alliances at Iberdrola. And Gonzalo, what I'd like to ask you is, how should companies engage meaningfully with the challenges faced by children and youth, particularly those who are most affected by climate change?
Thank you very much. Good morning to everyone. Buenos días. I have to say that in a really difficult world, as Lara was mentioning, it's really hopeful to see so many people from different parts of the world, from different organizations like NGOs, civil society, governments, universities, firms, coming together to address such an important topic, that is climate justice and children. So, for us, for Iberdrola, we are an energy company, really committed to climate change, and we are seeing that climate change is accelerating. And we are already seeing its impacts in terms of floods, droughts, wildfires, and it's affecting all regions of the world. So, science tells us that it will be much more severe in the future, and it is well known that it will act as a conflict multiplier. For instance, reduced crop yields due to drought can trigger social unrest, migration, and so on. So, as always, these impacts fall hardest on the most vulnerable, especially children and young people. In this context, we see three injustices arise. The first is, it was mentioned, intergenerational injustice, as current generations are the ones who have caused the problem and should be taking effective measures, yet it will be future generations who suffer the consequences. The second injustice is injustice between high and low emitting countries. And the third injustice is social and economic injustice, since the most vulnerable, who contribute the least to the problems, will be the most affected, because they have less capacity to adapt to climate change, and often live in areas where climate change will have the worst impacts, for instance, Africa or India. So, in face of those challenges, companies, answer to your question, must take action and show social responsibility. So, what are we doing in Iberdrola? We are doing three things. First, we are accelerating climate action. For over 20 years, we have been investing to replace fossil fuels, which are the main cause of the problem, with clean, renewable energy. And in doing so, we help reduce the effects on climate change, especially for the most vulnerable, children and youth. Second thing, we are raising awareness about the importance of these issues. And I think in these difficult times, the role of firms in this area is really, really important. We engage with government, we engage with other companies, and we help people to understand the urgency of the situation, the need to accelerate climate action, and also the opportunities around climate action, especially opportunities for young and children. And third, we are working with others to improve the situation of young people in vulnerable circumstances. And in particular, for the last 4 years, we have a strategic alliance with UNICEF, Spain. Marta is here, that we are working together to harness the training and employment opportunities offered by this energy transition for vulnerable youth. And we are working together in Spain, in Brazil, and in Somalia. So, what do? We identify the most demand roles in renewable energies, in electrical grids, heat pumps, electric mobility. We train these young people with other NGOs in Spain or in Brazil, and this is the most important. We offer them internship and jobs, either at Iberdrola or among our suppliers. And as a result of this joint effort, this partnership is helping thousands of highly vulnerable youth to improve their social or professional integration through quality, future-proof employment, because we were talking about this is employment for today, but also for the future, and this is really important. So, as a conclusion, climate change is already showing its effect and is accelerating because we are not doing enough. Science tells us that it will continue to worsen, which means that today's youth will suffer the most serious consequences. We have to recognize that this is a highly complex problem that requires the collaboration of everyone. Individual actions from firms, from NGOs, are not enough. We need the combined efforts, and we need work together, government, businesses, universities, NGOs, and citizens to transform society into a more sustainable and just system. And I want to end with a message to young people. Be more proactive and demand action from government. You are not responsible for the climate crisis, but you will bear the brunt of its consequences. Through your engagement, You can influence the decisions of governments and the decisions of companies, helping drive progress to a fairer and more sustainable system. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for bringing that important perspective from business, for sharing what you're doing, but also for recognizing how much further we still all need to go. I'd like to now introduce the last of our panelists who's joining us here in person. It's a real pleasure to introduce Elder Moreno, international human rights lawyer with the Council of Europe and something of a children's rights legend, if I may say so, who's been working to develop the Council of Europe's strategy on the environment. My question to you, Elder, is how does the Council of Europe see this interconnection between children's rights and the protection of the environment, and how can it help overcome some of the barriers for children accessing justice in the environmental context?
Tough question. Thank you very much, and good morning, everybody. So let me start. My son is a streamer, and I'm a mainstreamer. So one of the first jobs that I had in the Council of Europe was actually to mainstream children's rights in all Council of Europe policies and actions. And this led me to design already almost 20 years ago, the program Building Europe for and with Children. And this program marked indeed a turning point. First, because it mobilized the whole leadership and the whole organization around this topic. And second, because it opened two very important strands of work, which were the promotion of children's rights and the elimination of all forms of violence against children. And it still does, and we have very important representatives of the team here. So for those who are not familiar with the Council of Europe, the Council of Europe is an intergovernmental organization made of 46 member states, and our mission is to build Europe upon 3 values. We are very proud of it. It's human rights, democracy, and the rule of law. So in 2007, so just 1 year after the creation of the program, we managed to get the Conference of Ministers of Justice of the Council of Europe to discuss child-friendly justice. So it was the first time ever that the ministers would look into the topic, and actually they gave a mandate to the organization, to 4 bodies in the Council of Europe, to look at child-friendly justice. So these child-friendly justice guidelines that emerged from that mandate are, I'm sure that many of you know them, and are an example that the Council of Europe, the things that are done, that are made in the Council of Europe, may be made in Europe, but not meant for Europe only. These are standards, these are materials that can be used everybody in the world. If I have taken a couple of minutes to describe these processes, because I really believe that process matters. The processes are important and actually should be part of the vision. And those many of you, all of you who are fighting for meaningful and safe participation of children know very well why. So coming back to mainstreaming, it really works. It really works, but it takes leadership, and it takes a lot of hard work. And I really need to mention the real mother of the child-friendly justice guidelines is our former Deputy Secretary General in the Council of Europe, Maud de Boer-Bokikio. She made it happen. She made the Ministers of Justice look at this topic. So it is really very important also to remember how critical leadership is for these kind of causes. So the program was so successful that then I was asked to apply the same approach to other topics to keep mainstreaming. So I developed a program to mainstream gender equality, to mainstream internet governance. And the reason why I'm here now is because I'm mainstreaming environmental concerns. So, and of course you can guess it, that this gave me the opportunity to bring together children's rights and the environment. So, the Council of Europe strategy on the environment, the first ever strategy on the environment, was adopted a month ago. And these are the 5 objectives. So, of course, because of the interplay between human rights, including children's rights, and the environment, and because of the Council of Europe core mission, what we have tried through the strategy is to bring these core values, democracy, rule of law, and human rights, and make the interplay with the environment. So the 5 objectives very much relate to this. The first one is integrated human rights considerations in environment-related strategies, instruments and policies, etc., and vice versa. The second one is strengthening good democratic governance in environmental matters. It's very much related to the excellent work done in the UN, for instance, through the Aarhus Convention. The third one is supporting and protecting environmental human rights defenders, environmental defenders and whistleblowers. The fourth, preventing and prosecuting environmental-related crimes. And the fifth, protecting wildlife, ecosystems, and habitats and landscapes. So you wonder how, you ask me how children's rights is reflected here. Well, first, they were reflected, they were part of the process, the drafting process of the strategy. There was a consultation with children, and young people were present in all the meetings of the drafting committee, including civil youth-led NGOs. Second, of course, the strategy acknowledges that children are amongst those who are disproportionately affected by environmental degradation, including climate change. And, but third, of course, there are specific mentions of children's rights and the need to adapt justice, but also other systems to make sure that children can claim their rights in the context of environmental matters. So, in addition, the strategy, what it intends is to elevate the very good work that is already done in the Council of Europe and make sure that Council of Europe is accessible also to children and young people. And you will see an example of how this is really important to us. But it has been in the past a concern, and it remains a concern, that many of the good things that we all do are really too far away from children. So I want to mention 2 cases in the European Court of Human Rights. You know, the European Court of Human Rights is one of the most accomplished systems of human rights protection. Individuals can bring complaints to the European Court of Human Rights based on a violation of the European Convention of Human Rights. So in 2020, the European Court of Human Rights received the first ever complaint concerning climate change, a violation of human rights because of climate change or lack of action to stop climate change. And guess what? It was brought by children. So this first ever complaint to the court was brought by 6 Portuguese nationals aged 8 to 21, most of them children, and it was brought against Portugal and 32 other countries. The court didn't look at the merits of the case because it found issues about jurisdiction. It found that it couldn't get into the merits, unfortunately. But interestingly enough, in 2020 as well, 2 months after the children have filed their complaint, an association of elderly women from Switzerland together with a few of the elderly women, filed a complaint against Switzerland because of lack of action for climate change. And this time, the court could decide that there was a violation of the convention, in particular Article 8, which is right to a private life, and Article 6.1, which is right to a fair trial. So if we read these two cases together, you can draw a lot of lessons on how to help children in the future, how to make sure that children have real access also to international courts, and what needs to be, what kind of support they need for this. So this is why when we are now, the first step after the adoption of this beautiful strategy on the environment is, of course, thinking how are we going to implement it. And also knowing from the experience of the impact and the results of the mobilization of the whole organization, we know that this can be extremely powerful because we have people working in education, in justice, in youth, in media, and artificial intelligence, etc. So we will focus on two of the objectives of the strategy for children and young people. One is the number 2, where we are considering an initiative, work on misinformation, disinformation, and actually access to information. So it would be really extremely interesting, and this is the reason why I had to come, not to speak, but actually to listen, to find what can the Council of Europe usefully do to support access to information for children in environmental related and climate related issues. And the objective 3, which is going to focus, the first initiative is going to focus on supporting environmental, young and child environmental activists. And here again, I think that these are really very important things to do, and that we have a lot of potential in the Council of Europe, so with the youth sector, which works closely with youth. But again, I'm here to talk to anybody interested in joining the reflection on what can we do that adds value to what you are all doing. So I hope that in 5 years, when we will look at the impact of the Council of Europe strategy on the environment, we will see a lot of progress for children, both in Europe and beyond. And I will keep mainstreaming, making sure that the main doesn't go into the stream. Mm-hmm. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Elda, and for ending with an invitation that I hope we'll get to take up during the Congress today and the parallel sessions where we'll continue the conversation about climate justice. We have one final speaker who unfortunately hasn't been able to join us in person, but I'd like to introduce Yasmin, who is a young climate activist and a member of the Child and Youth Advisory Committee for the Congress.
Mm-hmm. My father used to tell me about how he enjoyed his childhood, especially during the moonlight dances. It was a wonderful occasion for children to have fun, interact with peers, and learn from elders. Looking through my window, especially when there's a full moon at night, it angers me that I cannot be able to do what my father did when he was young. I see gullies, erosion sites, mosquito-breeding environments, and debris scattered everywhere. I end up sighing and closing my window curtains. Among the things that bother me the most is the practice of open defecation, which is really awful for human health. My name is Joshua, I'm 14 years old and I'm from Nigeria. In my country, Nigeria, we face natural disasters like flooding, excessive heat, and drought. Lake Chad, which was once West Africa's largest lake, is now drying up due to the effects of climate change. This lake was a major source of fresh water for millions, including children, and supported irrigation and fishing. Since the lake started drying up, families have lost their livelihoods. Farmers can't get enough water to grow their crops. Fishermen catch fewer fish, and access to clean drinking water is now shrinking. Children are the most vulnerable. Poverty worsens, leading to malnutrition and diseases. Children drop out of school, are forced to do hazardous jobs, or become victims of early marriage. As someone who is passionate about change, I couldn't just keep quiet and watch our environment deteriorate. While I can't control wildfires or droughts, I can act on my immediate environment. Climate justice to me means ensuring that those who are the least responsible for climate change, especially children, don't bear the heaviest burden of its impacts. It means taking action to create solutions that protect the most vulnerable. This belief led me to form a team of 5 high school students who share my passion. Together, we created Recycling for Sustainability, which is an initiative that transforms trash in our community into useful things like solar-powered lanterns, children toy cars, and fans. We built a prototype of a sustainable city with solar-powered appliances to show our community members what sustainable living looks like. We also created other prototypes like a solar-powered ship and a 45 kg 5-feet airplane that is powered entirely by solar panels. These award-winning prototypes challenge the aviation and ship production companies to make their products sustainable by incorporating solar energy into their products and reducing fossil fuel emissions. Despite our efforts, government action is crucial. Since the Paris Arrangement, children in Nigeria can now engage with the government on climate policies through initiatives like the Children's Parliament, where young Nigerians advocate for climate action and education. Also, thanks to our present state government who is working really hard to fix the major road that's leading to our community. However, we need more. I want to see the government ban plastic waste, enact laws against improper waste disposal and open defecation, and reach its net zero emissions goals by 2050 to 2070. Children deserve a healthy, clean, and safe environment to live and thrive physically, emotionally, and academically. The time is ticking. We must act now to protect their right to a healthy environment.
Thank you to Yazul for sending us that video, and a final thank you to all of our panelists today for the wonderful conversation, and to all of you for joining us. It's been a real pleasure. There'll now be a 10-minute break while we move to the parallel sessions.